The sound of sliding wood drew everyone's gaze to the door at the far corner of the classroom. The class quieted down as they saw their teacher step inside before turning his gaze to the open door. All of the kids' curiosity was piqued as a small boy slowly walked to the side of the teacher. The most noticeable thing was his spiky, blonde hair. The brilliant, golden locks jutted out at various angles with two bangs looming over the outsides of his eyes. His eyes were a bright, shiny blue with small, black pupils. But they were dull, unfocused. His eyes seemed to take in everything but see nothing. Underneath each eye were 3 brown-gray birthmarks that slanted horizontally from his cheekbone to his jawbone, reminiscent of whiskers. Just above his pointed chin was a pair of pale pink lips that were set in a line. Not a smile, not a frown. He didn't really have a facial expression at all. Around his neck rested a necklace of black and white beads. It was a simple piece of jewelry, comprised of thick, circular beads that alternated. 10 black beads on one end followed by 6 white beads, then 3 black beads, repeating all the way to the other end where there were 10 more black beads. The necklace lay just before his defined collarbone. On his torso was a low, crew-cut mesh tee that left much of his slightly defined torso visible. Over the mesh he wore a black and white plaid flannel. Only the 2 buttons above the bottom one were closed. His lengthy legs were covered by a black pair of cotton synthetic jeans. They were devoid of pockets, made up for by the small pouch that was fastened to his right thigh. The pant legs were tightly secured to his shins with white tape. On his feet were a pair of black ninja sandals. The teacher's voice suddenly broke them from their observation. "This is Uzumaki and Naruto, and I'd like for you to give him a warm welcome to our class." None of the students noticed their teacher's stuttering. The dead look in Naruto's eyes really unnerved him. "Naruto, if you would, you may sit by Ino." Naruto's eyes slowly scanned the room until he noticed a blonde-haired girl eagerly raising her hand and grinning. He walked over and sat at the end of the 3-seated desk. Ino was to his immediate left, and a large boy with red swirls on his cheeks sat noisily munching on something to her left. He didn't spare either of them a second glance as he slowly looked forward and patiently awaited the beginning of the lesson. Their teacher gave a slight cough as he sat at his desk before telling everyone to grab a textbook. Time skip. 2 years, graduation day. Most of the students were anxious to begin team placement as they chatted noisily, speculating who would be on the same team. Only 9 kids had passed the academy out of the original 21. Iruka was sitting at his desk, surveying the classroom until his eyes landed on a pair of dim blue ones. His stomach twisted and turned as Naruto continued to stare. It was obvious that Naruto wasn't looking at Iruka. He wasn't looking at anything. His eyes were simply open. Everything about Naruto made Iruka feel uneasy. The had scored perfectly average marks throughout his 2 years in the academy, and he'd never said a word to anyone, let alone interact. Iruka cleared his throat before standing up from his chair. "Alright class, listen up. I'm proud of all of you for making it this far, but life as a ninja will only be harder from here on out. I wish you all good luck in your ninja careers. Now, I'll announce the teams." The class became silent as they listened for their names. Teams 1 through 6 are still in circulation. Team 7 will be Uchiha Sasuke, Haruno Sakura, and Uzumaki Naruto. Sakura was cheering that she got the 2 hotties as Ino pouted that she wouldn't be on Naruto's team. Sasuke was intensely staring at Naruto's emotionless face. Team 8 will be Inuzuka Kiba, Hyuga Hinata, and Aburame Shino. Kiba looked over at his future teammates and shrugged. Could have been worse, he thought, glancing over to Naruto. Shino nodded to Kiba and Hinata before once again looking forward. Hinata nervously poked her fingers together as she looked between Kiba and Shino. Silently grateful she was paired with her friends, she blushed as she looked to the front of the room at Naruto. Team 9 is still in circulation. Team 10 will be Nara Shikamaru, Yamanaka Ino, and Akamichi Choji. Shikamaru and Choji were sleeping and eating respectively as Ino groaned at having the laziest 2 people of the class. "You can all wait here for your sensei to arrive. Once again, I'd like to wish you all good luck and farewell." Iruka disappeared in a swoosh of leaves. Almost as soon as the leaves from Iruka's shunshin hit the floor, more leaves appeared in the air along with a beautiful, scarlet-eyed woman. She beckoned with her hand as she walked toward the classroom door. "Team 8, come with me." Kiba ogled his new sensei as he and his teammates followed her out of the room. It was obvious that that woman was the most punctual of the three sensei, because it was 10 minutes later before the next one arrived. There was now a small pile of leaves on the floor as another person appeared via shunshin. A gruff-looking bearded man with spiky hair held up by his hite-8 pulled out a cigarette before heading towards the door. "Come on Team 10, you guys are with me." Ino, Shikamaru, and Choji all groaned for different reasons as they followed the man out of the room, Choji closing the door behind them. With just Team 7 left, time slowly ticked by. Sakura was too busy fangirling over her two teammates to notice her sensei's apparent tardiness. Sasuke continued to stare hard at Naruto, but eventually grew annoyed with waiting and began pacing around the room slowly. And of course Naruto had not moved since morning when he had sat down in class. It was 2 hours later the sliding door opened and a man with gravity-defying silver hair poked his head in. His only visible eye, the right one, crinkled into what Sakura and Sasuke assumed was a smile. "My first impression of you guys is..." Kakashi trailed off as he locked gazes with Naruto. "Well, let's save that for later. Follow me up to the roof." Kakashi knew almost everything about Naruto. When he was still just a newborn, the Kyuubi no Yoko had lashed out against the seal in a fit of rage. There were no obvious effects, but as Naruto grew up it became painfully so. As a baby Naruto was utterly silent. He never cried and technically, still had yet to say his first word. He was kicked out of the orphanage at age 3, where on his first night living on the street he was abducted by a couple of drunk chunin. They hung him upside down by his ankles to carve him up and, after growing bored of his apathy, doused Naruto in sake and lit him with a match. Throughout all of it Naruto never made a single noise. Even as he could feel his skin searing off of his body, he faced forward and patiently waited for someone to untie him. It was by far the most unsettling thing Kakashi had ever seen. After that, he had been assigned as Naruto's Enbu guard. Naruto practically lived his entire life from there in an alleyway next to a ramen shop. Kakashi had tried, multiple times, to find housing for Naruto. He'd even attempted to adopt him, but he was stonewalled at every turn. No one in Konoha wanted to help Naruto, either out of hatred or fear of ridicule from those who did hate him. Eventually, at age 9, Naruto began training to become a ninja. He learned the basics of the core arts, taijutsu, ninjutsu, and genjutsu, from Guy, Kakashi, and Kurenai respectively. After a month under each teacher, Naruto spent 9 months training himself. When the Hokage sent Kakashi to get Naruto and enroll him into the academy, they realized letting him train himself was a bad idea. While his abilities had progressed admirably, particularly his chakra control, Naruto himself had become malnourished and sleep-deprived, neglecting the basic needs for more training. He would take a break to eat merely once every few days and the only sleep he got was the unconsciousness that came with chakra exhaustion. Once Naruto was enrolled in the academy he had to be provided regular meals and told when to sleep, in order to get back to proper health. With graduation coming up, Kakashi had requested Naruto for his team because he felt responsible to train his sensei's son. And so here he was, staring at the all-but lifeless form of Naruto. "Okay, so to begin, why don't we start with our name, likes, dislikes, hobbies, and dreams for the future?" Kakashi said, not taking his gaze away from Naruto's face. "Why don't you go first, sensei? Show us how it's done." Sakura suggested airily. Kakashi inwardly groaned. He already felt she would be the weak link in this team. "Okay, my name is Hitaki Kakashi. I don't feel like telling you my likes and dislikes. I don't have any hobbies and dreams. I never really thought about it." Sasuke's lips twitched in amusement as Sakura groaned at Kakashi for the vague answers. "Now you go." Kakashi pointed to Sakura. "My name is Haruno Sakura. I like Sasuke-kun and Naruto-kun. I dislike Ino Buddha. My hobbies. My dreams." Sakura blushed and giggled at the end as she glanced between the two boys on either side of her. Sasuke took the initiative and went next. "My name is Uchiha Sasuke. I like tomatoes and dislike a lot of things. I don't have any petty hobbies and my dream is more of an ambition. That is, to kill a certain man." Sasuke said this while glaring at Naruto, causing Sakura to squeal at his coolness. Knowing that, if left alone, Naruto would just sit there until he died, Kakashi spoke up. "You're next, Naruto." Naruto opened his mouth to speak but nothing came out. He had never spoken in his 12 years and his vocal cords were more than a little out of use. Naruto strained his throat harder and was able to produce a quiet noise. He blinked at his own voice and Kakashi internally cringed. A 12-year-old hearing his own voice for the first time. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto." Naruto's voice was slow and somehow smooth, despite years of disuse. Kakashi smiled at that. "Well, now that introductions are over, I'll tell you about your first mission. Tomorrow, we'll begin survival training. Meet me at Training Ground 3 at 9 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. Oh, and don't eat breakfast, you'll just throw it up." Kakashi disappeared with a wave. Sasuke huffed and got up, slowly walking away while ignoring Sakura's persistent requests for a date as she trailed after him. Left alone, Naruto walked to the railing and decided laid beside it. He took off his necklace and slowly tossed it between his fingers, staring at it with his emotionless eyes. Naruto put his necklace back on as he slowly sat up, having laid next to the railing sundown to sunup. Getting to his feet, his eyes slowly scanned the village. He didn't know the exact time, but it was obviously not 9 yet as the sun had only just become visible about an hour ago. Naruto climbed over the railing and dropped down onto the dirt street below before slowly making his way towards his home. As he walked he was greeted with many stares, most of which contained little other than pity. Almost all of the older residents of Konoha used to believe Naruto was Kyuubi's reincarnation. He'd been hated for the better part of a decade. Only over the course of the past year had that narrative finally gone away from the public. After getting to know him, if only a little, they knew there was no way in the 9 circles of hell that Naruto was any such thing. He was extraordinarily silent and surprisingly obedient, as if he didn't have a will of his own. He didn't bother anyone and kept entirely to himself. He was pure, in a way. Everyone watching cringed as Naruto approached a small ally with a dumpster on one side. Before Naruto had begun training, he'd spent almost every minute of his life in that ally. He could usually be found sitting against the wall across from the dumpster, playing with his necklace in his hands for hours on end, or slowly rummaging through the dumpster, looking for something to quiet his stomach's groans. Naruto stopped in front of the ally and slowly looked side to side before turning around and walking to the ramen shop that was across the street. Kakashi had treated him there a few times, so he was kind of familiar with the place. He walked through the flaps and stood by the counter. The waitress, Ayame, was standing in front of a pot of boiling noodles and he could hear Tucci slicing up vegetables in the back. Realizing Ayame was busy, Naruto took a seat on the stool at the right end of the row. He decided to wait until they were done preparing the shop for business to say anything. Talking. It was so odd and foreign, but he couldn't deny how much easier it seemed to make communicating with people. Ayame let out a small gasp when she turned and noticed Naruto sitting in one of the stools. He slowly looked up from the counter, locking eyes with her for a moment before she had to look away. He looked every bit alive as her mother had on her deathbed. The shop doesn't open for another hour or so, but if you're really that hungry." Ayame looked back at him to see his answer, but felt her jaw hang when he actually responded with words. "I need directions." The words came out slowly and Ayame stared at Naruto for a few moments before nervously shifting to her other foot. "Yeah," was all she could croak out as Naruto continued to stare at her. "Where is Training Ground 3? Ayame gulped as she shifted again. How would she know? She found it hard to think with Naruto's eyes looking straight through her. After a few very long seconds, Ayame shifted for a third time. She did spend a year in the academy before needing to drop out and help with her father's business. Maybe she could take a guess. Go to the B back of the academy and keep G going until you reach AA, an open field. I think." Ayame blushed terribly as Naruto gave a slow nod. She hadn't stuttered that badly since her first day in the academy. She gave a sigh of relief as Naruto turned and began to walk away sluggishly, like he didn't have somewhere to be. Sasuke and Sakura arrived at Training Ground 3 to see Naruto leaning against an upright log. His eyes were focused on the necklace dangling between his fingers as he slowly moved them. Brushing off another date offer from Sakura, Sasuke walked up to Naruto. "What are you doing?" Naruto didn't look away from his hands as he responded. "Waiting." Sasuke scoffed at his answer and walked over to a tree and sat down to glare at Naruto. Sakura excitedly glanced between her two teammates, unable to decide who to sit next to. Eventually, she opted to plop down where she was and continue to look between her two crushes. It was almost 3 hours later that Kakashi arrived, reading a little orange book. "Good morning." When no one responded, Kakashi looked at his 3 charges. Sakura was every so often switching her gaze between her teammates while she quietly giggled. Kakashi hated fangirls. Sasuke was glaring heatedly at Naruto's face, brooding. And Naruto was lying on his back, looking up and not blinking at all. Kakashi took out a pair of bells and jingled them a few times, causing all 3 kids to look. "Now that I have your attention, we can begin the survival test. These bells will be fastened to my person with string. You need to get them from me. Anyone who doesn't get a bell will be sent back to the academy. Any questions?" Seeing Sasuke shake his head and Naruto remain silent, Sakura shook her head as well. Then, "Hajime." Sasuke and Sakura darted off to the sides of the clearing while Naruto remained. Kakashi looked over at him as he slowly stood up, clipping on his necklace that had been lying on his chest. He slowly walked up to Kakashi and reached out to grab the bells. Kakashi batted his hand away as he leaned in close to Naruto. "You'll need to come at me with the intent to kill." Naruto suddenly reappeared behind Kakashi with a kunai in his right hand and the bells in his left. Kakashi turned his head around to smile at Naruto. "Good." From the sidelines, Sasuke's and Sakura's eyes widened as both Kakashi and the bells in Naruto's hand turned into puffs of smoke. So fast. Sasuke and Sakura had a hard time following the battle with their eyes. Kakashi was simply a blur and Naruto seemed to be flickering around, the only audible noise being the clangs of kunai. After a few minutes the 2 nin appeared in the middle of the clearing, kunai locked. Kakashi effortlessly pushed Naruto back with the kunai in his right hand, his left hand still holding up the Icha book he was reading. Naruto back flipped and closed his eyes as he filled the clearing with copies of himself, all of which were rapidly flickering. Kakashi's eye widened and he pocketed his book as the copies all sprinted at him. He almost flinched as a kunai went straight through him. Regular bunshin. He flicked his left arm out and heard a clang of metal. Cage bunshin. Kakashi ducked under a kunai thrust from a clone, unsure if it was an illusion or not when he was launched forward from a firm kick to his back. He rolled out of the way as a clone stabbed the ground he was lying on. Jumping to his feet, Kakashi was unable to avoid a kunai to his throat and almost breathed a sigh of relief as it passed right through him. He needed to get out of the clearing quickly. Kakashi had been on the receiving end of this tactic before and was a bit embarrassed to say that, without using his Sharingan, he lost to it every time. Naruto's actual fighting capability wasn't anything special, but when he learned a jutsu, he didn't stop until he had at least modest mastery of it. What he was doing now was an overwhelming technique, unless the person on the receiving end had some sort of visual prowess. There were upward of 100 clones, 90% illusions, the rest actual copies of himself. With his insane mastery over the Kawarimi jutsu, Naruto was constantly substituting himself with his bunshin with his cage bunshin with himself. An ability uniquely possible due to his large chakra reserves. The ordinary bunshin had originally been one that required far too much control for him to perform, so, with help from the Sandaime, he had developed a workaround. Functionally they were the same, they simply required more chakra and, although still intangible, possessed an actual chakra presence, making it possible to use Kawarimi with them. It was quite difficult for Kakashi to tell what he was fighting at any given moment, and he definitely could not put down his guard to reveal his Sharingan. Naruto was an ideal shinobi, emotionless. If Kakashi made one little mistake, there were 3 possibilities: he'd be attacked by a harmless bunshin, a cage bunshin, or Naruto himself. The second 2 kid and would kill him. Kakashi continued to dodge the attacks of the clones as he stepped on his left sandal with his right and pulled his left foot up a bit, loosening the footwear. As he felt the tip of a kunai begin to bite into the skin on his back, he kicked his left foot up hard, sending his loosened sandal flying almost 90 meters in the air. Kakashi felt warm blood flow down his back as he used Kawarimi with the sandal, leaving it impaled on the bloody kunai and him flying high in the air. Looking straight ahead, Kakashi sighed in resignation. It felt like slow motion as he saw a slightly crumpled leaf floating in the air. Must have gotten kicked up with my sandal, Mo. To most, it would be an insignificant point of observation, but Kakashi knew Naruto. He could use Kawarimi with nearly anything, let alone something as big as a leaf. Kakashi watched as the real Naruto appeared in front of him and swiped the bells. Naruto and Kakashi were suddenly replaced with clones that promptly disappeared, leaving them safely on the ground. That was another thing. Naruto was the only person who Kakashi had ever even heard of that was capable of using Kawarimi on people other than himself. Naruto hadn't completely mastered the Kawarimi. Kakashi wasn't sure if there was such a thing as complete mastery over a technique. But Naruto was certainly the best with that jutsu that he'd ever seen. As Kakashi silently sulked at yet another loss to Naruto's Kawarimi, said Blonde slowly walked over to his two teammates. They appeared out of the foliage and jogged up to Naruto, who handed them a bell each. Sasuke and Sakura looked like fish out of water as Kakashi came up to them and put a hand on their shoulders. "You all pass." Kakashi cheered jovially. Sasuke and Sakura just turned to him with their gaping mouths and unsuccessfully tried to form words. "Ah, well. This was really a test to see if you guys are cut out to be genin. My test particularly is to test teamwork," Kakashi stated before rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. "Now, you guys didn't really do anything as a team, but for the good of the team and the mission." Naruto gave away the bells, and that, Kakashi trailed off as he scratched the top of his head. "Always remember, those who break the rules are trash, but those who abandon their teammates are worse than trash." He nodded to himself, hoping they wouldn't ask any questions about the validity of the test. Naruto's eyes widened largely, unnoticed by his teammates. Kakashi, though, almost choked on his own tongue. That was the first time he had seen any kind of expression on Naruto's face. Surprise wasn't exactly an emotion, but it was something. Kakashi guessed it made sense, though. Naruto had always followed orders above all else. As for his excuse, Kakashi couldn't tell them the only reason they were passing was because he had a soft spot for Naruto. Soft spot was probably an understatement. If Naruto up and murdered the fire daimyo, Kakashi would help him cover it up. "Well, you guys go home to get some rest." Kakashi stopped as he looked at his three students, two of which were staring at him incredulously. Sasuke and Sakura had done nothing and Naruto didn't look any worse for wear. Well, how about we go get our first mission, nay?" The next day, the Hokage rubbed his temples and gave a deep sigh as he eyeballed the blonde 12-year-old standing in front of his desk. "Listen, Naruto-kun, it is highly unorthodox for any team to do anything but D ranks for at least a month." Hiruzen repeated. Naruto blinked as he also repeated himself. "I would like to request a C-rank mission, Hokage-sama." It had only been a day, but Naruto was talking more naturally now, with less pauses. He still spoke a bit slowly, but that was just Naruto. Unless he was given an order with a timetable, he took his time with everything that he did. Hiruzen puffed out a bit of smoke as he leaned back in his chair. After giving Naruto a hard stare for a few seconds, he smirked. "All right, I've got a C-rank mission available, but it won't start for at least another 2 days." Everyone in the room, sans Naruto and Hiruzen, had their eyes wide and mouths agape. The Kami no Shinobi, the Sandaime Hokage, had just given into a genin. The Hokage had just given a fresh out of the academy genin team the go-ahead to accept a C-rank mission because a genin and simply asked for it. The aged Kage smiled and placed his pipe back between his lips as Iruka sputtered incoherently next to him. Meeting adjourned. 2 days later. The 2 days had gone by incredibly quickly. Kakashi had his 3 genin trained profusely in the concept of teamwork, and he had to say, he was impressed with their progression. They had a general understanding of each other's battle, tactical, and support capabilities as well as an establishment of team roles. Though it greatly irked Sasuke, Naruto was decidedly the team's primary fighter. Sasuke was also a good fighter, far better than Naruto actually, but Naruto's ability to overwhelm his enemies made him a superior asset in battle. Sakura was bereft of any combat ability, if they were being honest with themselves. But she was quite intelligent and worked well in tandem with her teammates. Team 7 waited at the main gate of Konoha as they saw the figure of a man approaching. When he reached the booth Izumo and Katetsu were stationed in, the team walked up to him and, after some brief introductions, began the trek to Wave. Kakashi headed the formation with Naruto directly behind him, Sasuke behind the group, and the man, Tazuna, in between Naruto and Sasuke. Sakura walked with Tazuna, explaining that they were the team that would be protecting him as they disappeared down the road. Tazuna and his escort were walking toward Wave Country at a leisurely pace. Sasuke's excitement to have a mission outside of the village was only visible through the small smirk on his face. Sakura was annoying Tazuna and anyone else who could hear her with questions that, if she gave them a bit of thought, she should already know the answer to. Kakashi read his smut while he kept aware of his surroundings, though he wasn't too worried as it was only a C-rank mission. Completely unlike himself, Naruto was observing his surroundings and not letting any detail escape him. That included the pitiful attempt at genjutsu that was in the form of a puddle in the middle of the road on a perfectly sunny day. The rest of the group stopped as Naruto squatted down in front of the puddle and tilted his head to the side. "Come out." Sasuke, Sakura, and Tazuna looked at Naruto oddly as nothing happened while Kakashi smiled to himself, proud of Naruto's ability to detect the illusion. After a couple seconds of utter silence, the water from the puddle slowly rose into the air before forming into two human figures. Before anything could be said or done, Kakashi was wrapped up in chains and promptly turned into a small pile of torn flesh and cloth. "One down," one of the men said while pulling his chain back. Naruto stood up and opened his mouth to say something, but closed it and tilted his head as he made a half-ram seal with his left hand and fished out a kunai with his right. "Four to go," the two nin yelled simultaneously as they launched their chains at Sakura. 10 copies of Naruto appeared and rushed the two rogue nin while Naruto himself batted the chains away from Sakura with his kunai. Gozu rose an eyebrow and grinned as he flicked a chain at one of the copies in the air, but blinked when the chain seemed to go straight through. "Not even Kage Bunshin? This will be easier than I thought," he laughed as he tugged his chain back. Gozu continued to grin up at the clone falling towards him even as it drew back its kunai. Hearing a squelch and a thud, Maizu turned away from the original Naruto and his eyes widened. Gozu was face up in a pool of his own blood with a clone standing over him. That's not possible." Maizu turned to look at the blonde who was now standing directly in front of him, having dispersed his clones. He opened his mouth to speak, but was silenced as Naruto drove his kunai into his throat. Naruto's head tilted to the side as he watched the blood flow from the gaping mouth of the man, run down his kunai, and onto his hand. He followed it with his eyes as it slowly trailed down his wrist before forming a drop and falling into the dirt. Naruto glanced up, into the eyes of Maizu. They looked similar, in this moment. As Naruto tugged his kunai out of Maizu's still-standing corpse, he watched the body fall to the ground. He looked over to the dead body of Gozu lying in a pool of blood. Naruto's eyes widened as he felt something strange. He brought his hand up to his face, feeling his lips curved in an unfamiliar way. Naruto decidedly enjoyed the experience of taking another's life. Kakashi grimaced from his place in the bushes. Sasuke and Sakura were pale white as they continued to give Naruto a wide-eyed stare. They had just seen Kakashi die. Naruto passively killed two nin who were probably vastly more skilled than himself, and it appeared Naruto enjoyed it. Sakura trembled as she watched Naruto slowly wipe the blood off of the kunai on the shirt of one of the corpses. "Why, you're gonna keep it?" Naruto looked up at her with the barest trace of a grin. "I don't want to waste kunai." The unfinished bridge 2 hours later. Tazuna and the team were silent as they sat on the boat, slowly drifting towards the shoreline across the strait. After questioning Tazuna about the nin that were after him, Kakashi and his team had decided to keep with the mission despite the fact that it was now at least a B+ rank. The walk had been quiet with everyone besides Kakashi keeping their distance from Naruto. Said blonde had held the same kunai for the whole walk, and began polishing it with a rag he found on the boat. Kakashi read his smut, occasionally glancing at Naruto. While he would admit that Naruto's performance was a bit excessive, he was proud of him. Naruto had dispatched 2 B+ rank nuke nin, the Akuma no Kyodai, on his very first mission. Sakura was staring worriedly at Naruto, feeling conflicted between her feelings and his actions. Sasuke had gotten over what happened pretty quickly. Although it was unsettling to witness someone kill 2 humans so passively, it was not his first time seeing such a thing. The ferryman used his paddle to bring the small dinghy to a stop before they reached the shore. He nodded at Tazuna as he and the genin got out of the boat and swam the rest of the short distance to the shore, Kakashi still reading Icha Icha while he walked across the surface of the water. That earned him more than a few annoyed glances. The group walked up onto the shore and began trekking down a dirt path. As they passed a bush, Naruto jumped ahead of the group and flicked a kunai into it, startling everyone but Kakashi. "Kami, Naruto, what the hell are you doing? You scared me," Sakura yelled, flustered. Naruto ignored her as he walked up to the bush and squatted down. He slowly pulled up a dead rabbit, holding it up by the handle of the kunai that was lodged into its head. Tazuna found himself swallowing a lump in his throat as he nervously eyed Naruto. "Kid's a damn sharpshooter." Everyone's attention was suddenly drawn to a faint buzzing sound. "Get down," Kakashi called as the noise rapidly became louder. He shoved Sakura to the ground before tackling Tazuna. Naruto and Sasuke were already flat against the dirt. Everyone looked up as a loud crack resounded from a nearby tree. A Zanbato was stuck in the tree with a man stood upon its handle. Sharingan no Kakashi. No wonder the demon brothers failed. The man's voice had a smooth raspiness to it. Kakashi's jaw tightened and he moved to lift his Hite 8, but before he could even open his mouth to say anything he saw Naruto substitute a falling leaf onto the handle next to the enemy nin. Kakashi's eyes widened as Naruto's fist buried itself in the man's gut, sending him reeling at least a couple hundred meters. He immediately rematerialized behind Naruto and sent him back to the ground with a swift kick. "You're faster than I would have expected, runt," he growled. Kakashi kept his eyes on the tree as he spoke to his team. "That's Momochi Zabuza, demon of the hidden mist. As of the most recent bingo book, he's an A- ranked nuke nin. Sasuke, Sakura, stay in formation, guard Tazuna. Naruto, I don't want to say this but I might need your help here. Just don't do anything reckless, our #1 priority is protecting the client." Zabuza gave a loud bark of a laugh as he jumped down, pulling his Zanbato with him. "Kakashi, that gaki will only weigh you down." Sasuke narrowed his eyes as mist started to appear. "No way in hell am I just going to sit back while someone fights for me," he thought, slipping a kunai from his pouch and waiting for Zabuza to appear as the mist got thicker. It was tense few moments devoid of sound and movement before a slight shadow flashed nearby. Kakashi and Naruto suddenly appeared in front of Tazuna simultaneously, deflecting Zabuza's sword strike. Kakashi glanced sideways at Naruto with an approving eye. "He's definitely your son, sensei." Sakura found herself shaking under the killing intent radiating from Zabuza. "This is a Junin? I'm dead, we're all gonna die." A sick weight settled in her stomach. Seeing his teammate shaking like a leaf, Sasuke scoffed. "Sakura, it's one of him against 4 of us, we'll be fine," Sasuke said slowly. By the way his jaw tightened, he obviously wasn't enjoying the team player role. Sakura smiled slightly. The crunch. Sakura was quickly cut off as she was hit in the face with the flat of Zabuza's large sword, launching her into the forest. "TCH. The battlefield is no place for idle talking," Zabuza growled. "I would agree." Kakashi appeared behind Zabuza holding a kunai to his neck. "Sasuke, go check on Sakura, I've got things covered here," Kakashi yelled. Sasuke nodded with wide eyes and dashed off into the forest. Zabuza craned his neck to look at Kakashi. "Do you? Shit." Kakashi cursed as the Zabuza in front of him splashed into water. Quickly spinning around, he barely managed to block Zabuza's sword with a kunai, the force of the strike pushing him out onto the lake. Kakashi flashed through a string of hand signs before sending a torrent of water from the lake at Zabuza in the form of a dragon. As the Sweden technique crashed against the shoreline, Zabuza was temporarily obscured from view. After the water died down, Kakashi became distinctly aware of his opponent's absence. "Where did?" Kakashi's eyes widened as a pair of hands grabbed his ankles and harshly pulled him into the water. Kakashi immediately sprang back to the surface and furrowed his brow in irritation as he eyed Zabuza. He was stuck in a spherical prison of water, and observing Zabuza with his Sharingan, Kakashi could tell that it was simply a clone that was maintaining the prison. Flicking his eyes to the shore, Kakashi's eyes widened and a heavy feeling settled in his gut. "Kami, no." Naruto was standing on the shore, eyes shifting between his sensei and the thing between him and his sensei. Naruto was remarkable for a genin, but Zabuza was an A-ranked nin. Kakashi knew that Naruto stood absolutely no chance in a one-on-one fight with him. Zabuza gave a wide grin, showing off jagged teeth, and his eyes widened in bloodlust. Let's see if Kakashi's faith in you is misplaced. Naruto flooded the area with clones as Zabuza charged him. He never took his eyes off of Naruto as he sprinted, slicing clones whether they were illusory or not. Naruto easily ducked under a wide horizontal swing and lashed out with a kunai. Grinning as he allowed the kunai to bite into his ribs, Zabuza batted Naruto away with the flat of his sword. You're subpar at best. Running around, pretending to be a ninja. It's pathetic. In a burst of speed he was behind Naruto, delivering a vicious knee to his back. Naruto's eyes widened as he tumbled across the ground. I can't win. Zabuza was going to kill Naruto, but that didn't matter. It was what Zabuza would do to Naruto's team afterward that made Naruto's jaw tighten. Naruto flipped onto his feet as his eyes flitted left and right. The blow had broken his concentration, dispelling all of his clones. Zabuza grinned as Naruto's dead eyes bored into him intensely. Flicking a kunai into his right hand, Naruto created a clone in front of him. Wasting no time, Naruto quickly substituted Zabuza with his clone, his kunai burying itself in Zabuza's stomach a split second later. Blood dripped down Zabuza's chin as he spoke. That's damn impressive, but not nearly good enough. Zabuza kicked him away and took a large, diagonal swipe at his chest. Jumping back, Naruto only just managed to avoid being cleaved in half. He felt the familiar sensation of blood rising up his throat as his back slammed into the ground roughly, rolling onto his front and shakily pushing himself up as Zabuza chuckled behind him. Maybe I'm selling you short, kid. Naruto glanced at the demon between him and the lake. He took in a large breath, revealing his sharp canines, before blowing a large gust of wind in front of him, causing leaves to rise from the ground and drift in the air. Unsurprisingly, Zabuza was utterly unaffected. Come on, what was that? Zabuza yelled insanely. He was quite enjoying this. Naruto concentrated, ignoring the pool of blood at his feet. Zabuza grunted as he was suddenly tackled from his left, sending him flying into a tree. Smart. Zabuza internally appraised his opponent's tactics. Naruto had substituted with a leaf to get to a blind spot. Unlike Shunshin, substitution is difficult to detect, due to the small amount of chakra it uses. Naruto created 2 Kage Bunshin, which sprinted at the Mizu Bunshin that was holding Kakashi captive. Only moments later, he heard a splash of water, signifying that his sensei was free. Snapping his head back to a recovered Zabuza as he heard Kakashi sprinting towards him, Naruto threw up his hands to catch an overhead sword strike. The warm feeling of blood pooling in his palms sent shivers down Naruto's spine. He was fascinated as the blood trailed down his forearms. Zabuza kicked Naruto to distance himself a bit before smashing the flat of his blade into Naruto's skull, launching him across the shoreline. Kakashi was stopped short of burying his kunai in Zabuza's neck when 2 senbons suddenly did the job for him. A figure appeared directly afterward, ducking next to Zabuza's body. Arigato. Kakashi ignored them entirely in favor of dashing away. Their Hunter Nin mask was explanation enough, and he needed to see if Naruto was okay. Flickering into existence next to his student's body, Kakashi paled. Naruto was in a pool of blood and had a large, diagonal cut across his torso. The thing that worried him most was that Naruto was awake. His eyes were open, blankly staring into the sky. His hands were toying with his necklace. Most of all, his lips were set in a slight frown. Kakashi hefted Naruto up into a bridal-style carry, ignoring the way his clothes became drenched with blood. Though somewhere, in the back of his mind, he felt sick that his sensei's son was coloring him red. Kakashi worriedly glanced at Naruto. He was mouthing something to himself. Kakashi walked back into the clearing to find Sasuke returning with a newly awoken Sakura and a slightly shaken Tazuna. The 3 of them blanched when they noticed Naruto's condition. If it weren't for his slightly moving lips, they'd have thought he was a corpse. Lead the way. Kakashi mumbled to Tazuna. All right, I'll take you to my daughter's home. It's not far. Tazuna replied, unnerved by the sight of such a brutally injured child. Is he gonna be all right? Kakashi-sensei? Sakura asked in an odd voice as she limped over to him. She was probably out of commission for a while. Yay! Sakura didn't believe Kakashi's answer and neither did he, but they were both worried for completely different reasons. Tsunami's house 30 minutes later. Sasuke eyed Naruto as he sat on his tatami mat. Naruto had been cleaned up by Tsunami and was only wearing a pair of Anbu pants Kakashi had handy. His upper body was covered by diagonal bandages, and his hands were also wrapped up. From what Kakashi had told everyone, Naruto had just barely managed to hold his own against Zabuza, only long enough to free Kakashi. Sasuke was a very prideful person, how could he not be? He was dubbed the last of the Uchiha, and being an Uchiha is something to be proud of in and of itself. But he was not ignorant. Though reluctant to admit it, he knew he couldn't have lasted half as long against Zabuza. Sasuke was more skilled than Naruto, but skill doesn't directly equate to power. Men are felled by beasts constantly. That's what Naruto was, a beast, a monster. He was much stronger than Sasuke, and that strength earned him grudging respect from the raven-haired. But Sasuke didn't know just how close he was with his assessment. Sasuke's train of thought was derailed as the sliding door of the room opened to reveal Kakashi. "Tsunami has prepared dinner, if you're hungry," Kakashi said, putting away Icha. Sasuke made a "hn" noise as he got up and strode past Kakashi, causing the Junin's eyebrow to twitch as he glanced at Sasuke's retreating back. Kakashi's eyes briefly flicked to Naruto before he followed Sasuke down the stairs and to the table where everyone else was seated. Tsunami looked away from her conversation with Sakura as Kakashi sat down. "Isn't Naruto-san going to eat?" she questioned in slight worry. Kakashi raised an eyebrow at her. "Naruto-kun is sleeping," Kakashi said obviously. Tsunami's eyes flicked upstairs as she got up from her seat. "I'll go see if I can get him up," she said quietly. You do that." Kakashi trailed off as Tsunami was already gone. He glanced to his left as he heard Tazuna trying to drown out his laughter by downing his sake. Sasuke was smirking in slight amusement. Catching on, Kakashi grinned slightly and looked over to his right at Sakura, who was scowling. Who does she think? Probably just wants alone time. Mine, out of her league. Sakura was mumbling to herself as she glared hard at the table. Unable to hold it, Tazuna barked out a loud round of laughter. Sasuke's smirk widened considerably and Kakashi was full on eye smiling. Sakura huffed and began to eat her food with aggression. In the spare room, Naruto-san, Tsunami murmured as she shook Naruto gently. He cracked an eye open, startling her. "I made supper, if you want." Naruto's other eye opened and he glanced at his stomach just as it gurgled. "Okay," he said slowly. Tsunami laughed and gently pulled Naruto up. He stumbled forward a bit, leaning on her as her arms wrapped around him for support. It was sort of an impromptu hug. Naruto felt something odd in his chest, like a small rustling. The embrace felt nice. He slowly brought his hands up to Tsunami's back in an awkward hug, his first hug. She pulled him tighter against her. "It's good to see that you're okay. I heard the length you went to protect my father." She smiled beautifully over his shoulder. Naruto slightly backed up and gave Tsunami an intense stare, making her fidget as his eyes searched hers for a long moment. "Thank you," Naruto said with a slight nod. Without another word he walked out of the room and down into the kitchen. Tsunami laughed to herself as she followed him out after a moment. Naruto was obviously a very odd child, but there was just something about him that she liked. Not to mention he's incredibly adorable. The next day, Sasuke sighed in frustration as he looked at his female teammate. She stood atop her tree, smiling and giggling as she watched Naruto performing multiple chakra control techniques at once. Naruto had already known how to tree walk, and Sakura had only taken 5 minutes to get the hang of it. For whatever reason, Sasuke couldn't get any higher than 10 feet before he fell or exploded off. Sakura, continue to walk up and down the tree. Whenever you use your chakra, you build your maximum reserves. You obviously have excellent control, but low capacity. Chakra control exercises can be a good way to fix that. Kakashi called up to Sakura. With an enthusiastic nod, she began trekking up and down. Kakashi looked over at Sasuke, who exploded off of his tree, and grinned. For all its downs, being a sensei had its ups, and this was one of them. Much later, Naruto blinked slowly, unafraid of the sinister red eyes that glared back at him. Are you not afraid, Ninjin? The Kyuubi asked, already knowing the answer. Naruto shook his head and took a few steps forward as he opened his mouth to speak. I need power. The large, red eyes closed and opened again, smaller this time. A tall woman of a curvy stature emerged from the darkness and grinned wickedly with her ruby lips. And what could a ninjin possibly have to offer, in return? Naruto's eyes flicked up to the paper-marked seal, and Kyuubi's excitement showed in its tails as they slowly swayed behind it. Naruto was abruptly torn from his mindscape, awakening to a girl nudging him slightly. What are you doing sleeping out here? You'll catch a cold. Naruto looked blankly into her eyes with his dull ones. Meditating, not sleeping, he droned. She had the decency to look sheepish as she stood back up. Ah well, sorry about that. My name's Haku. I'm out here gathering herbs for a friend. Haku said, friendly enough. Naruto flickered to his feet, making Haku tense slightly. This is the boy Zabuza told me about, but he is supposed to be severely injured. Haku took note of the large bandage across Naruto's chest. It was stained slightly red. Naruto eyed the basket that Haku was holding as he cracked his back. What does your friend need poison for? He said blandly, glancing up to Haku's face. Haku started to sweat a bit. I didn't think he'd know what these were. Ah, yeah no. Haku said quietly, stuff. Naruto nodded and began walking away. Wait, Haku called after him, mildly surprised at the abrupt end of their conversation. What's your name? Uzumaki Naruto. He replied, still walking. The next morning, Naruto woke up to a quiet house. Slipping his sandals on and slinking downstairs, he paused when he saw two bandits holding on to Inari and Tsunami. Please, take me instead. Don't hurt him, Tsunami cried as the bandits debated about who to kill. Okay, your mother really cares, kid. Too bad you ain't gonna see her ag. The bandit was suddenly cut off as a kunai flitted across his throat. The other bandit whirled around, brandishing his sword. Before he could ask, who's there, a kunai was buried into the base of his skull. Naruto watched the blood drip from his kunai for a few moments before Tsunami's voice broke him out of his stupor. Thank you, Naruto. Thank you so much, she cried, clinging on to Inari. Naruto ignored her. Where's my team? He asked plainly. At the bridge, why? He once again ignored her as he dashed out the door towards the bridge. The unfinished bridge. Naruto inhaled deeply as he stood before the bridge. In the distance there was a dome of ice with faint clangs of steel emanating from it, as well as the occasional spout of flame. Nearby, Kakashi desperately avoided wild swings from a seemingly resurrected Zabuza. And off to the side of the bridge was Sakura standing just in front of Tazuna, apparently shaking in fear and unable to move. Kakashi might not be able to win his fight, but he could almost certainly survive, and either way he wouldn't be beaten so quickly. It seemed like Sasuke was in the most danger. Naruto slowly exhaled before disappearing in a long-distance Kawarimi with a piece of stone. As he reappeared outside of the ice mirrors, Naruto surrounded it with clones. He wasted no time substituting himself with Sasuke as his clones all sprinted into the dome. Naruto, what are you doing? You're going to get yourself killed, idiot! Sasuke yelled in annoyance. Naruto glanced at him briefly before dodging a hail of senbon. Go, help Kakashi-sensei, he said blandly. Sasuke grit his teeth roughly, but listened and dashed off to the other end of the bridge. Naruto turned to face the reflection in front of him as it spoke. I do not wish to harm you. Forfeit, and I will spare you and your friends. The masked woman spoke with slight hope. Naruto's eyes began to bleed as the beautiful blue was swallowed in black ichor. Yuko, Kyuubi. His dead voice made her stomach churn as the whites of his eyes were devoured by darkness as well. Naruto glanced around at all of the mirrors before looking back at the reflection. Almost too quickly for the woman to track, Naruto was in front of her, swinging his leg towards the mirror. She traveled to another mirror before the hit landed and her eyes widened behind her mask. The mirror had a noticeable crack from the impact and Naruto was almost upon her again. As she jumped to another mirror, she let loose a barrage of senbon. Naruto substituted himself with the masked woman, causing her to be riddled with her own needles. She landed roughly on the concrete, the impact shattering her mask. The revealed Haku bit her lip and melted into the mirror behind her to stay out of reach of Naruto and his clones. Doesn't he recognize me? It seemed that he didn't care who she was, he was going to kill her. Naruto. Naruto stopped briefly and looked into her eyes. He blinked slowly, causing liberal amounts of blood to cascade down his unnaturally pale, whiskered cheeks. All of Naruto's clones disappeared as he crouched down low, gazing up at Haku. She jumped to another mirror just as the one she was in was shattered. Narrowing her eyes in slight determination, she made a string of one-handed seals before sending a hail of senbon as she jumped to another mirror. Naruto batted the needles away with a kunai and leapt at her. He missed by a wide margin. Whatever technique Haku had used seemed to significantly increase her speed. Flipping out of the way of another group of senbon, Naruto launched a kunai at Haku. With a sharp intake of breath, she moved to an adjacent mirror as the kunai was firmly buried into the mirror she'd just left. Rapidly glancing back to the center of the dome, Haku could see Naruto muttering something. She was only able to make out the last few words. "Hi, Kyuubi." Haku blinked and she was flying through the air. Looking down at herself, she felt white-hot pain coursing through her. Bloody cuts and gashes littered her body and pieces of jagged bone protruded through some places in her skin. Blinking again, Haku was suddenly on the hard concrete of the bridge's surface. Sharp pains shot through her as she craned her neck to see Naruto slowly walking towards her. She'd never been so terrified in her life. His eyes were wholly black and had wide, slightly dried trails of blood leading down to his chin. His open-mouthed breathing allowed her to see his large canines. Whatever he was, it couldn't be human. Naruto hefted her up by her neck, eyes intently raking over her form. Haku felt sick as Naruto's eyes followed trails of blood while they flowed from her wounds. Looking away and over his shoulder, her despair deepened. Zabuza was being held down by a pack of dogs as Kakashi rushed at him, right hand encased in electricity. With whatever chakra she could muster, Haku performed a shunshin. Following the trail of residual chakra, Naruto saw Haku standing in front of Zabuza like a human shield. Hearing a low chuckle in his head, Naruto felt his own lips stretch into a lopsided grin as he disappeared. Kakashi's eyes widened as a battered Haku appeared in front of Zabuza. He didn't want to kill the girl, but he had too much momentum to stop now. That surprise only lasted a fraction of a second, though, before it was replaced with dread as Haku was suddenly replaced by Naruto. Everyone on the bridge heard the resounding squelch of rent flesh. Kakashi's fist had cut clean through Naruto's abdomen. Eyes wide with insanity, Naruto firmly grabbed Kakashi's arm and pulled it until his sensei's shoulder hit his chest. Kakashi felt ready to vomit. His entire arm was completely through his student's torso. His sensei's son, behind Naruto, who was sporting a broken grin, Zabuza was coughing up blood, speared on Kakashi's hand. The gray-haired nin had to swallow down bile as he pulled his arm out slowly from Naruto. His whole appendage was drenched in blood, most of it his student's. Glancing at Naruto, Kakashi could see Zabuza fall limply backwards through the hole in the blonde's chest. Kakashi's eyes widened slightly as the hole began stitching itself closed. Muscle fibers weaving together while skin tissue slowly grew back over top. The power of the nine tails. Kakashi opened his mouth to say something to Naruto, but cut himself short as he saw his eyes. Admonishing him for such a thing would probably be useless under normal circumstances, never mind when he was under the influence of Kyuubi's potent chakra. Well, it seems my plan played out to a everyone sans a morning. Haku looked to the end of the bridge. A short, pudgy man with a receding hairline and an awful pair of shades was leading a group of hired thugs. Naruto's lips twitched as his eyes bled into black once again. It only lasted seconds. He tore into them with a vicious hunger. The fat man was the first to go, his head being separated from his shoulders with a satisfying snap. To most, it was unnecessary violence. To Naruto, it felt like art. Cutting into their arteries, casting the blood to form beautiful arcs and sprays. Lights leaving their eyes as waterfalls of crimson ichor splashed from their wounds. The smell was so intoxicating. Naruto's eyes returned to normal as they admired his masterpiece. No one noticed the still shaking Sakura with a similar expression on her face. Completed Kai no Uzu Bridge, 1 month after Zabuza and Gato's deaths. A crowd of villagers stood in front of Team 7, sans Naruto, to see them off. Kakashi was ruffling Sasuke and Sakura's hair, causing them to scowl and beam respectively as Tazuna and his family walked up to them. "Are you sure you have to leave so soon? You four will always have a place in our home," Tazuna said jovially. "It's appreciated, Tazuna-san, but we have to get this report to Hokage-sama," Kakashi replied, turning around to leave. Before he could so much as twitch, Tsunami was directly in his face. "Don't I get to say goodbye to Naruto-kun?" she questioned with wide eyes. Kakashi's sweat dropped slightly as he turned around to look for Naruto. He was leaning against a tree a fair distance away, blankly staring at Haku, who was in a form of prostration. Kakashi's sweat drop grew considerably when he realized she was telling Naruto her life story, and he seemed listening to exactly none of it. Go right ahead," Kakashi said, rubbing the back of his head. Tsunami was gone before he was halfway through his sentence, causing Kakashi to blink. "Alright then, my cute little genin, it's time to start heading back," Kakashi said enthusiastically. He got a fist pump from Sakura and a HN from Sasuke. Kakashi's eyes smiled at them as they began down the dirt path back to Konoha, Naruto catching up a minute later. Naruto was leaning up against a tree, watching his team say their farewells to the civilians of Wave. He didn't see the point in saying goodbye to people you didn't know. His haze of boring introspection was shaken by a sudden displacement of grass and leaves. Looking down, he saw the girl from the bridge kneeling by his feet. Haku, as he recalled. She was silent for quite some time before finally speaking, looking up at him to make eye contact. "As a young girl from the Yuki clan, I was born with a Kekkei Genkei. The same ice release we are renowned for. The Sandame Mizukage wasn't fond of Kekkei Genkei. He hunted us. Anyone with a bloodline limit was prosecuted and killed. Or tortured. My father, he went mad one night. He attacked my mother, saying that she was a freak. Then he rounded on me and afterward, I lived on the streets, cold and hungry. Then Zabuza found me and took me in. He gave me shelter, protection, a reason to live." Haku was once again silent for a long moment. "Now that he's gone, I'm just a broken tool, useless like a rusted kunai. Unless," she trailed off with the slightest glimpse of hope in her eyes. Naruto had tried to concentrate on her words, but all he could hear was a loud, swooshing. It was all-consuming and he could feel it in his body. He realized, vaguely, that it was the sound of Haku's pulse, and he could barely control the urge to rip it out of her throat. To make the fascinating red liquid gush out. He could picture it. Oxygen-rich blood squirting out, casting beautiful arcs. Then the more viscous blood, oozing down tantalizingly. The sensation built behind his eyes, pounding like a headache, only it didn't hurt. "Ohio, Naruto-kun, you weren't just going to run off back to Konoha without saying goodbye to your Oba-chan, were you?" He sucked in a deep breath and looked away from the still kneeling girl towards the approaching Tsunami. Somewhere in the back of his mind he was aware that killing Haku would be wrong. The walk back to Konoha was a peaceful trip for all, except for two particular travelers. Kakashi was lost in his favorite orange book, maintaining only enough awareness of his surroundings to make sure that he was still on the road and not wandering into the forest. Naruto was keeping a keen eye on the road, the trees, and his teammates, prepared to intercept any threats, but was otherwise relaxed. Sasuke, on the other hand, was struggling to keep his hand out of his kunai pouch as he eyed the dangerous kunoichi that was shadowing Naruto persistently. He had only just recently been in a fight for his life against her, and now she was at his teammate's exposed back. Am I the only one freaking out? He glanced over to Sakura and noticed her tightened jaw and narrowed eyes, thinking that she was having similar thoughts, except, who does she think she is? She's hanging all over Naruto-kun like some kind of harpy. Shanuru, let's rip her apart and show Naruto-kun what a real woman is, were the thoughts of the silently fuming Pinkette. It seemed that Naruto's displays of barbarism had resonated with her inner self. The final traveler of the group, Haku, was keeping herself astutely aware of any and all potential threats to her new, self-proclaimed master. A few hours later, Izumo and Katetsu raised their eyebrows at the extra person walking with Team 7 through the gate. "Halt, state your name, occupation, and business," Izumo said with surprising authority. Wow, it's almost like you're an actual chunin, Izu. Kotetsu teased with a wide grin, earning him a swat on the back of the head. Haku turned to address the eternal chunin with a barely noticeable scowl. I am Yuki Haku, defected nin from Kirigakure, and I am here because Naruto-sama is here, she said with a cold glare, daring them to question her reasoning. Despite the sudden uneasiness in his stomach, Kotetsu spoke up. Nuke nin? And what do you think you're going to find in Konoha? We don't have any problems with Kiri, and we aren't about to start any by harboring one of their criminals. Kotetsu said airily. He didn't like her attitude. Haku scoffed, and all the surrounding nin felt the air temperature drop slightly. I think your use of the word criminal is questionable, and that whether or not I may enter this village is up to your cage, not a couple of chunin. Haku said, pointedly looking away, signaling the end of the conversation. Kakashi, Sasuke, and Sakura all sweat dropped at Haku's standoffish behavior in dealing with foreign nin. Well, this is Team 7 officially signing back in. We'll be seeing Hokage-sama now, ahehe. Kakashi laughed awkwardly as he walked off to the large building under the Hokage monument, still reading. Sasuke and Sakura shared a glance before looking to Naruto, who seemed to be zoning out. While Sakura was wondering what he might be thinking, Sasuke thought he had a pretty good idea. I know what it's like to be shown how powerless you really are. But then the strength he displayed at the bridge. How did he get it so quickly? There's no way he managed to obtain it through a few days of training. What's he hiding? Sakura's mind was different. Mew, Naruto-kun really let loose in wave. I didn't know he had such a brutal side. Right, Kami. The way he turned everyone inside out without even breaking his cool was hot. Yay, even Sasuke-kun loses his cool sometimes. TCH, Sasuke Baka looks lame by comparison. Sasuke and Sakura were snapped out of their thoughts by Kakashi, who was standing a ways up the road. You guys complain about my punctuality, and then turn around to space out in the middle of the street? Why did I have to be charged with such horrible children? Kakashi called back melodramatically, though he was curious what all three of his genin were thinking so hard about. He filed that away for later as they caught up to him and entered the Hokage Tower. The secretary at the desk of the bottom floor grinned invitingly at Kakashi as he walked up to the desk. Hitaki-san, reporting from your C-rank mission? She asked, already filling in the information and filing it away. Ah, yes, Keiko-san. Kakashi said, not taking his eye off of his book. Keiko deflated when she noticed she wasn't going to get the famous Sharingan no Kakashi's attention. But I definitely will next time. As Team 7 ascended the stairs to the Hokage's office, Kakashi finally put away his book for the first time in the last 3 hours. These are sure to be trying times. Aya-chan, Maki-chan, stay warm for me. His genin did not miss the forlorn look on his face as they entered the office. The Hokage looked up from a waist-high stack of paperwork, briefly acknowledging the presence of a foreign nin, before greeting Team 7. Ah, Team 7, yes. A month is quite a long time for a C-rank mission. Though, I expect it was a success? The Hokage questioned, talking around the old wooden pipe between his lips. Hi, Hokage-sama, although I don't quite think it should be classified as a simple C rank. Kakashi said tentatively. The aged Kage raised an eyebrow before leaning forward on his desk, gesturing for Kakashi to continue. Well, on the way to Wave, we ran into the Demon Brothers. They were dispatched quite easily. Naruto took care of them handily, ending the encounter in under a minute. Kakashi said, trying to communicate with his eye what he didn't want to remind his genin of. They had seemed to handle their first experience with death in the field very well. He didn't want to ruin it. If he was a bit more aware of his students' mental states, he would have realized there was nothing to ruin. Hiruzen inhaled deeply from his pipe, brow furrowing before he puffed out a bit of smoke. Kakashi was trying to tell him that Naruto had experienced his first kill. Well then, this is a C rank at least. If you'll excuse the interruption, Hokage-sama, that's not all. Kakashi said, bowing respectively. Well, out with it, Kakashi. Hiruzen said. After the Demon Brothers, we ran into Momochi Zabuza of the Bloody Mist, twice over. The first chance meeting with him, we discovered that his target was the bridge builder, Tazuna. With a little help from Naruto, I was able to fend him off, but he was saved by a false hunter nin before he could be adequately handled. Kakashi did not miss Hiruzen's eyes drifting to Haku. Aged though their cage may be, he was as sharp as ever. The second time we faced Zabuza, it was with his apprentice. I was able to dispatch him, and after being whittled down by Sasuke, Naruto was able to make quick work of the false hunter Nin. Kakashi finished his report, leaving out some choice details. Of course he was loyal to the Sandaime, but Naruto would always come first. Well, the Hokage started. I must say this was quite unexpected. This is certainly more than a C rank. A few orders above. I'd say an A- rank. Your pay will be adjusted to accommodate these complications, but Kakashi, I am interested in your reasoning behind why you decided to continue the mission after the first meeting with the Demon of the Bloody Mist. This was not a solo mission. You had Genin to look out for, but we can discuss this later. Right now, I would like to hear why you have brought along what is sure to be a foreign nuke Nin. She came of her own accord, Hokage-sama. Kakashi was cut off by Haku as she strode up to the Hokage, taking center stage of the conversation and making Kakashi's eyebrow twitch. I am here because Naruto-sama is here. Haku repeated her earlier words, although much more respectfully than before. Kakashi didn't need his Sharingan to notice the mirth dancing in the Fire Shadow's eyes. Ah, Sama, has Naruto-kun gained a following? Hiruzen asked with a smile. You could see from the lines in Crow's feet that Hiruzen was a man who had laughed a lot in his day. Haku's lips pursed, and it was easy to tell she didn't appreciate the Hokage finding humor in something she took so seriously. She held her tongue though, and continued on. I would like to request residency as a nin of Konohagakure. I will commit my loyalty to the village and its cage, and proudly wear the headband of the village that Naruto-sama represents. Haku said strongly. She seemed resolute, on the surface at least. Well, Team 7, you are dismissed. See Keiko-san for your pay and take a week's leave from missions, though I suppose it'll be more than a week. The Hokage chuckled at something the genin didn't yet understand. As for the apprentice, remain here, and we will discuss the possibility of your enrollment as an official nin of Konoha. Hiruzen said, making it clear that he wasn't promising anything. All of Team 7 bowed their heads before leaving, something the Hokage noted with pride. Okay, team. Our first C rank spiraled into an A- rank, and you guys did great. Here's your pay, and we'll meet back at Training Ground 3 in a week. Yeah. Kakashi disappeared in a puff of smoke, leaving his genin alone. He seemed to be in a hurry. No. The word left Sasuke's mouth before Sakura could even open her mouth to ask him on a date. Bummed out, she turned to ask Naruto on a date, but deflated further upon realizing that he was already gone. She turned around again to see Sasuke walking off to the Uchiha compound, presumably to train. She noticed that was all her teammates seemed to care about, training. Maybe she could win one of them over if she could train hard enough to impress them. Or both, fufufufufu. Bleg, keep the Uchiha loser away from us. Later, Naruto stood once again before the large cell that contained the mighty Kyuubi. It was back in its original form, as a fox. Is the ninja going to keep his word? Kyuubi asked, teeth glinting maliciously in the dim mindscape. Naruto looked at the paper marked, seal, and felt a nagging sensation in the back of his mind. Originally, he had had full intentions of filling his end in removing the seal, but now, how would that affect his teammates? His Hokage? The people of Konoha? He wasn't trash. Kyuubi, I'm afraid I can't hold up my side of the bargain. Naruto said slowly. Kyuubi's teeth gnashed together violently, a guttural growl ripping from its throat. You insolent human, you cannot simply dishonor a pact with me. Red chakra began whirling malevolently around the massive fox, thrashing against its cage in violent red waves. It was a testament to the strength of the seal that the bars didn't give an inch. If only the same could have been said 12 years ago. Because you don't want your suddenly precious people to suffer? Kyuubi sneered. I gave you the power you requested, and boy I will rip it right back out of you, lest you make good on your word. The Kyuubi was out of its mind with rage. In all of the millennia it has prowled the earth, it had never felt such a strong emotion. This ninja thought it would get away with deceiving the Kyuubi no Yoko? It was laughable. Seeing as Naruto had no intention of removing the seal, Kyuubi began to try and forcibly pull his chakra out of the boy's coils. Naruto gasped before falling forward onto his hands and knees. A pain like he'd never experienced before began to surge through his sides. It felt as if his kidneys were being run through by rebar. The agonizing sensation seemed to carry on for minutes, though logically he knew it was only seconds. Once Naruto collapsed, the Kyuubi relented. It had taken a lot of concentration to directly affect his host's chakra through the seal. Naruto sucked in a harsh breath as he shakily stood up. Was that it? Kyuubi's large red eyes widened in bloodlust, and the last thing Naruto saw before being ejected from his mindscape was the Biju once again lashing out against the bars of its cage.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.